serious all of a sudden.
No, man.
Hopefully you can all, you're not blocked by the pillar.
We are.
Yeah, you are.
Good evening, everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you very much for joining us this evening here at Cheche Books. How many of those here in the room, this is your very first time to this lovely space? Isn't it great? Yeah, I don't know where Uba and her team is, but we're just really grateful to Cheche Books for having us here. And Karibuni Sana, my name is Kevin Mwachiro. I will be your host during this conversation with Michael Solis as we talk about his debut novel, Deficient, and a big hand to Michael. So basically what the run of the program is, we will have a question and answer with Mike, have a conversation with you, Michael, and then we'll welcome questions from you, the audience, and after we're done with all the formalities, there'll be a book signing and the copies of the books available and a few other niceties that Michael has brought with us. So Karibuni once again, enjoy yourselves. And Michael, first obvious question is, just tell us a little bit about Deficient.
Perfect. So who in the audience is kind of nerdy like me and likes science fiction? Yeah? Okay, I see some hands, maybe X-Men, superpowers. Yeah, we all want superpowers, right? So Deficient kind of started off with an idea around the what if. So what if we as humans were to actually evolve in the sense of our maturity, right? If we were to get over and beyond some of the issues that divide us currently around race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., the things that are giving us trouble now, as a society and as humanity. What if we were actually to go beyond all that? We've overcome those challenges. The big what if in my mind was, well, what would happen if humans that were then to change in some other fundamental way that would change whether it's our genetic makeup or the way that we actually exist in this world, if we were to evolve. So I imagined a world where we did evolve. We evolved to acquire supernatural abilities. There's a hierarchy of abilities in this world, and where you fall on that hierarchy would determine how you're treated in society. So the question was, would we be, very peaceful and harmonious and welcome one another and hug one another and be very welcoming of people's differences? Or would we kind of slip into the same old patterns of behavior of creating castes and hierarchies and utilizing this as a way to justify discrimination and violence towards one another? So I suppose I was being a little cynical when I thought that maybe we would veer towards the latter. And that's what this book is really about. It's a society where most of us have evolved, most of us have changed, we've acquired different abilities. There's a very small percentage of the population that have remained normal, but in this future world, they're called deficiently accelerated or deficient, yeah? So the main character is a 15-year-old boy named Alejandro Aragon. He's the only student in his school. He goes to a school which is one of the few schools that allows education for the deficiently accelerated. But he faces really terrible treatment in his home, in his school, in his community, and society at large. So he has a really rough run of things. And what ends up happening in the book is that he has one friend who's more or less the rock in his life. But she ends up disappearing in a hate crime against her ability type. So it's quite complex in the sense of her ability as well. She's removed from the picture, and he basically has to summon up all the courage he has.
Okay, I think I need to stop you because you're
You have other questions?
Yeah, you're giving out all the good stuff, right?
Okay, sorry.
The thing, you talk about change, and this is a book that you first started writing in 2011.
Yeah.
You were in Honduras at that time.
Yes.
You revisited the book when you were in Sierra Leone.
Yes.
You picked it up again.
Yeah.
Finished it off in Kenya. At least what went to the editors. You finished that off here in Kenya, right? How has it's a two-pronged question. How has the book changed from 2011 to what you have now? And how have you sort of changed as a writer?
Yeah. So if we can think all the way back to 2011, like that was when the Hunger Games books and movies were coming out, right? So for my thinking back then, it was really focused on dystopia, and I was really intrigued by that idea and setting a book in that setting. It went through a long journey. So I wrote it when I was living in Honduras. I was working for a local grassroots organization called the Organization for Youth Empowerment. And I think a lot of the stories and the struggles that I was hearing about and listening about the people that we were working with, I think fueled the character also of Alejandro and some of the struggles that he faces in the book. I ended up, getting an agent to represent the book. That unfortunately did not go anywhere. It went through, different, iterations of this book. I kind of gave up on it when I moved to Sierra Leone because life there was quite intense. When I came back to Kenya, I said, okay, I'm going to give it a try again. And tackled the book, I think, again, working at it from the beginning to end. I think the book has benefited from the different experiences that I've had. I think the cast of characters is quite diverse. I've drawn from people who I've met and who have inspired me. The character of Yolamba is really taken from my best friend from Sierra Leone, who was really critical, I think, to my experience there. I was working there during Ebola. We were dealing with mudslides. We were dealing with floods. We were dealing with COVID-19. So it was a really stressful time of life, and Yolamba really was my rock. So I think that the book benefited from that because I think there's a sense of reality there and a sense of, I think beauty to those experiences that have somehow found their way into the book across cultures.
You've also grown as a writer. This was the second question. How, when you went back to it and looking back at the manuscript from 2011 to now and looking back at your journey, this being your debut novel, how have you changed, if you've changed? And how's your voice? How's your voice developed, if anything?
Yeah, so I think I draw a lot from my voice in my angsty, teen years to channel the voice of Alejandro. So I remember even going back to old journals that I wrote to see, okay, what did I sound like when I was a 15-year-old? And how do I actually capture that voice? Writing is really hard. I don't know if anyone here, maybe raise your hand do you like writing? Are there any writers in the crowd? Yeah, I know there's one right here. It's not an easy thing, and it didn't come naturally to me. So I think I've always been interested in it, and I think trying to draw from other inspiration from other authors, reading more books, getting more experiences. I think everything actually makes you a better writer. Being really open to the constructive feedback that I received on the book. I mean, nothing is perfect, but I think the very first draft would be looking very much different to what actually was published. Trying to identify inconsistencies, plot holes, even the way the characters dialogue. I think there are things that I've been able to strengthen technically over time that make it a stronger read. Pacing was another thing. I think the book, as you said, it reads quite quickly. So that was a big thing of not getting the reader stuck in moments and not being able to go through the book quickly was something that I think changed over time. So I'm much happier with where it is now than where it was when it first started. But I think the intention of the story was never disappeared. I think that the intentionality and the meaning behind the book and the reason why I wrote it, I think stayed true from start to finish.
What would you tell 15-year-old Michael when he reads this? What would 15-year-old Michael think about reading this book?
Yeah, I think 15-year-old Michael would have appreciated reading, books by queer authors, and different perspectives, diverse perspectives. I think a lot of the books that I read growing up, there was a fixed kind of casting and narrative. We often had, I think the white, straight male gaze was something that we were exposed to a lot in our writing and through different writers. And I think what we've seen now is really a much more welcoming of diversity across countries, across cultures, across voices, backgrounds. And I think I would have appreciated some of those perspectives. They weren't even visible in entertainment, right? Like, I remember being in high school and one of the shows that I really liked was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because it was one of the first shows geared towards teenagers or a young audience where you had, an openly lesbian character in the cast. And I think that was really groundbreaking, right? But at the same time, the entire cast of Buffy the Vampire Slayer was white, right? And this was taking place in California, a really diverse context. So I think the way that, I think art has evolved in terms of what we're watching, what we're viewing, what we're reading. It's been quite exciting to see that expanding over time. And I suppose being told, these stories are coming, even if they're not here now, and then also maybe you can be someone who helps contribute to one of those.
Okay. You said, did you struggle putting yourself into this book? Or how much of yourself is in this book and in the main character, Alejandro?
I think, there's definitely a connection. So I based certain things off of my own high school experience of feeling different, feeling a bit like an outcast. So I think that obviously is, part of Alejandro's experience. In my case, growing up, it was being, queer. And then that being growing up in a very homophobic context, growing up in a very conservative context, growing up in a very Republican context, actually. There was a real sense of homophobia when I was growing up. And this is in New Jersey, right? So if I was feeling it, I knew that other people across the country were definitely feeling it. When I was growing up, there were a lot of stories about hate crimes, people committing suicide, people being bullied in college, and yeah, it was not an easy existence for a lot of people. I think we have changed. I think we are, as a society, perhaps evolving in different ways, but it's not an easy struggle for anyone who does feel different. So I think a lot of that went into the voice of Alejandro. The familial structure, I drew on that as well. He comes from a family of, a father and a mother and 2 brothers. I really exaggerated, I think, the difficulties of maybe the experiences that I had for Alejandro's experience. I kind of imagined him having the 2 evil stepbrothers, like in Cinderella, and playing with those themes. But I remember feeling, even in my own household, my own family, it wasn't always a safe space, right? Mm-hmm. And my father is, he was a professional wrestler, actually. He beat up people for a living. And he comes from the border of Texas and Mexico. Spanish was his first language. He's someone who has faced racism in the United States. I think he can speak to that experience. And he overcame that with this supernatural ability of being an athlete, yeah? So me growing up, being the opposite, I have no athletic ability at all. I always felt a bit inferior, and I think that type of masculinity is what we've celebrated in our society. So I always felt like I was just never gonna get there. So I think maybe also going back to your other question around messages, I think that message of you are fine as who you are. Everyone has their own super abilities, right? Whether it's art, whether it's dancing, whether it's just being a kind person, reading, writing, sports. And I think being open to the diversity of what we all have on offer and celebrating that would be important. Yeah.
Before my next question, I'd like to invite you to read a little bit from Deficient, if possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Has anyone read the book yet? I see Zach over there. I know Zach has. I know Kevin has. Okay, so I'm not gonna read a passage that will ruin the story. I'll take something in the beginning. The very first chapter is actually Alejandro's on his way to school. And he's getting bullied on the bus, yeah? So he's being mistreated by his peers, by the driver of the bus. So it's not a great experience for him. And he actually counts down the hours of the day every single day. And he starts from the very, very beginning. He just wants it to end. So he gets to school, and then he's bullied again on his way into the school. So you're like, God, this kid has it's not easy just getting from point A to point B. And then we're introduced to his best friend, Yolanda, who kind of comes to save the day. So I'll read a passage, if I can see it, about Yolanda, yeah? A sudden boom of thunder draws my attention upward. A tsunami of charcoal clouds floods the sky, consuming the gray haze. I've never seen the transition happen so quickly. A giant scratch of white lightning cracks across the black clouds, and the thunder roars yet again. The rain that follows is an onslaught, like we're beneath the waterfall. Scheisse, Landon says. He tosses me to the side, and I plummet to the ground with a painful thud. I'm wet and cold. My face is pressed against the stone, and my lip is moist and tastes like copper. Splattering feet shuffle past me. No one stops to ask what's wrong or to help me up. It's not the first time I wish I could disappear like an unseen. Ale! I smile into the ground when I hear my nickname. It's not a name I hear often. In fact, there is only one person at the academy who uses it. I push myself onto my hands and knees to see Yolanda running toward me, her gray academy skirt swishing. In one hand, Yolanda is holding a glowing umbrella that emits a generous halo of white light. It evaporates the raindrops before they reach her head, keeping her dry. In her other hand, she has her sketchbook. Alejandro Aragon, Yolanda says as soon as she's at my side. She twitches her nose at me, a natural tick. Don't tell me you let that piece of scheisse knock you down again. What else was I supposed to do, y'alls? Stand up for yourself, fight back, defend your rights. I can't help but laugh as she guides me to my feet. Sure, fight back against Landon. I wipe the grit from my face. Any other death wishes you want me to make while I'm at it? He's a dim-witted atlas. Your mind can dance circles around his. And he can crack my head open like a chicken egg whenever he wants. I prefer to keep my brain inside my skull, thank you very much. Shielding me from the rain with her glowing umbrella, Yolanda interlocks her plump arm with mine as we walk to the academy's entrance. In the light of the spotless lobby, I notice Yolanda's braids have changed to violet, matching the new color of her eyes. The day before, her hair had been a shocking pink, and her eyes their normal brown. The grin on her face is wide and mischievous. I can tell she's been up to something. You were the one who made that storm happen, weren't you? I ask. Yolamba winks a purple eye and opens her sketchbook. I see a drawing of Landon and me on the walkway. Rain pours from the sky and a bolt of lightning flashes above our heads in the picture. It was a quick sketch, but it served its purpose. It's hard to suppress my smile as I think about Yolamba's ability to draw objects and scenarios into existence. She's the only feral at the academy with that kind of talent. To the other students, she's a freak. But to me, she's magical.
That was going to be one of my questions about Yolamba, the other character in this book, and you said it was based on a real Yolamba. We're going to tell us a little bit about how Yolamba helped you during your time in Sierra Leone, and it seemed really easy to actually use both her names in this book and to bring her, and she must have had a huge impact in your life while in Sierra Leone to be a central figure, to be Yolamba in the book.
Yes, and I think Yolamba gave her permission for me to use her actual name in the book. She was delighted. So Yolamba is from Sierra Leone. I lived in Sierra Leone for 6 years, and I think, as I said before, I arrived during the West African Ebola crisis, and at the time I was managing our programming for the organization that I worked for, and Yolamba was our head of finance. So when she came on board, she was just a breath of fresh air. She was so good at her job, so good at getting things done, on operations, on admin, everything financial related, just someone you could rely on for absolutely every single thing. And even little day-to-day things that she would help pick up and support me with was just fantastic. And she was managing a team of mainly men, and she came on board as a very strong, outspoken woman, managing a team. And slowly but surely, her team members trickled away because they weren't used to having a very strong, dominant boss who was a woman. And she was able to hire her own team. And those people stayed with her, very strong team, very reliable, just incredible people to work with. And I think over the years, seeing her shine, seeing her fight for what she believes in, for me that was just really inspiring. So she's become one of my closest friends in life, and we talk all the time. We still help each other out through different situations, and I think I couldn't have asked for anything better. I think the reason why I survived as long as I did in a really strenuous job was the support that I received from her professionally and also personally. So I owe a lot to Yolamba. So a bit of this is also an ode, to the Yolambas in our lives who help keep us going during difficult times. And I think I've had a variation of a Yolamba kind of in any time in life. When I was in high school, the girls who would take me to prom, and defend me from the bullies. In college, I definitely had my Yolamba there. So I think it seems to be an archetype that somehow finds its way into my life everywhere I go, and I really appreciate it. Yeah.
What does she think of the book?
Yolamba still has to read the book, so so she's actually, hers is on her way. It's waiting for her. So to get a book over to Sierra Leone is a bit tricky, but she's eagerly waiting to read it. But she's been following up. I put updates on social media. There's artwork on social media. I've designed character trading cards of the characters, which these are here. So if anyone wants one, you can take those. They're like those X-Men character cards that I had growing up that I loved. So Yolamba was actually able to influence the design of how her character appeared, the hairstyle. So she loves all that, and I can't wait for her to read the book. I actually hope she likes it. So yeah.
You started this book in Honduras, revisited, like I said earlier on, in Sierra Leone, and then write it in Kenya. Spaces that don't appreciate queer individuals, or queer lives. Was writing it in those spaces a way of you just letting yourself out? Was it a release just to find who Michael was, and hence it was really easy to write about, not just write about Ali and his life, but also as Michael just disappearing into another world to just find solace amidst everything that was happening around you?
Yeah, and I think the time, and I was younger when I wrote the book, and I remember being told before I went to Honduras, be careful, right? Because of the number of homicides against, the LGBTQ community, right? Now, I don't want to paint a horrible picture because there are fantastic people anywhere in the world where I've lived, and fantastic, open-minded, wonderful people in Honduras. But there was that reality there. And the organization I was working for, the Organization for Youth Empowerment, there were also queer youth as well, trying to find themselves, trying to discover themselves, and dealing with the barriers in the home, in the community, society, and school. And unfortunately, there are people who I knew from Honduras who have not survived, right? Who have been murdered in really vicious ways after I've left. So I think processing all that after I left Honduras was maybe part of the process as well. I think a lot of this came from my own existence, feeling weird, feeling queer, feeling different, being queer and feeling different growing up, and feeling like the outcast. So I think that's sort of a message here. It's not necessarily for people who are queer, right? It's anyone who feels different or has felt different at any point in their life, or might know someone who has felt different, and finding a connection to Alejandro who's experiencing that through his journey. And all the discrimination that he faces is based on ability, essentially. So I think there was a bit of a cathartic expression of getting out some of those frustrations that maybe I felt and experienced growing up, some of the violence I encountered in my own life, and recognizing that for some people it's much more extreme and much more difficult. But I hope the book and the message can resonate with them as well. I hope people can take away something positive from it.
Okay. You touch on a number of themes in the book. You've mentioned mental health. I struggle to get a word for it. There's an element with Alejandro finding his voice. Those bullying, those discrimination, those suicide. What are you hoping? What's your dream with this book in helping people, who are in high school, in college, in bringing out a number of these thematic issues that you've cleverly brought into the book?
Yeah, I think Alejandro is an interesting character, and I think one of the big challenges of writing a character like Alejandro, he really has zero agency, right? He's zero confidence, zero self-esteem. He's not starting off on a strong footing. And I think what we like about characters in books is when they have agency, right? So if you think of The Hunger Games, you think of Katniss Everdeen, the very first chapter, the very beginning of it, is that her sister is called, in the Reaping to compete in the Hunger Games. And Katniss knows her sister is not going to survive. Her sister is not physically strong. Her sister's very kind. She won't kill anyone in the Hunger Games. So Katniss sacrifices herself and competes in the Hunger Games. And we like that because Katniss has stood up for her sister. She's done something that we all think is right. And she's gone in with her bow and arrow, and she's going to rock the Hunger Games, right? She has that superpower, that super ability. Whereas Alejandro, unfortunately, doesn't have the bow and arrow. He doesn't have the confidence. He doesn't have the strength. He's almost like the sister in that situation so this is the main character that we're dealing with. But what he does have is a lot of intelligence. He has a bit of cynicism. He's snarky. The way he thinks about some of his enemies and the people who give him trouble makes us laugh a bit. And I think ultimately what he has, he's the kind of person who you can knock him down 1,000 times, but he's always going to get back up. Even if he won't get back up with his own ability, he's not going to be able to fight back. He will still keep going and going and going. And I think a big piece of that is that he really does have two people in his life, so it also shows the importance of the people around us, how important we are to our friends, to our family members. So he has Yolanda, and Yolanda really is the rock in his life, and she's removed. So he obviously needs to figure out, how do I find her, what happened to her before it's too late, without having a special ability. And he does have a confidant in his own mother, right? So as hard as his family life is with his father and his two brothers, his mother really is one of his biggest fans in his life. And she has to navigate that challenge of, I'm raising someone who's deficiently accelerated, he's not accepted in society or even in my own household. So she has to grapple with that challenge of having a complex household, to run that is a really difficult show to run. And I think, so we start rooting for Ale because he finds himself backed into a corner. He has to start taking actions, making really difficult decisions, pushing against systems to try to find out what happened to his best friend. So we see that agency starting to blossom and grow throughout the story, which is, I think, another reason why we connect to him in his journey. We want him to win, right? We want him to do it.
I wanted him to win so badly because his life just seemed so bleak.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, man, something needs to change along the way for him. And I those empathy, those sympathy, and I'm like, man, this guy needs a break.
Yeah.
And the one person who was there was Yolanda, and then she was taken away from that. it's that whole element of finding your voice. And during that period, he did find his voice. Throwing it back at you and your life, Michael, when did you find your voice? When did you start speaking up for yourself? And what?
Yeah, I think it took a long time. So it's not that we don't ever have voice, right? So I think I always had a voice, but when I became more comfortable with it was probably after when I came out. Yeah, so that was my senior year in college. So I got into a relationship my second year of college. It was very clandestine. It was very secretive. It was not a very open campus at the time for gay students or lesbian students or trans, especially trans. So it was a challenging environment, and if those relationships were happening, they were done in the shadows and in the confines of real secrecy. It was back during don't ask, don't tell time, so gay people weren't even supposed to be open and out in the army if they were in the military. Politicians in the U.S. at that time were very afraid to talk about anything related to same-sex marriage or gay rights. And so we've seen a real evolution, even from the time that I started writing the book to where, to the point where it got published. There's been an evolution in that thinking, at least in the US, though there's still challenges, right?
But it's and even globally as well.
And globally, in many countries, right? And I think, so it was a struggle for me to come out. I was really petrified. I really thought my family was just gonna kick me out and not want to have anything to do with me. It wasn't an easy coming out process, I must say, even though it should have, I don't like to make stereotypes, but I literally had posters of Britney Spears and Buffy the Vampire Slayer on my wall. So it should not have been a surprise, but it was somehow for some of my family members. So it was a process of talking about it, getting people comfortable with the idea, getting people past maybe what they envisioned for you and your life and your direction. And I did have a lot of support from friends through that process as well. The relationship did not survive because I think the person I was with, really struggled with identity for many, many years. Fortunately now is in a much better place. But I think it was a strange time where people really were struggling with their identities, and it was not easy. And I think the first year after college, I moved to South Korea, and I was working for the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, so I was exposed to all these really fascinating human rights issues at the time. And one of the demonstrations I went to were actually the comfort women. They're called comfort women. But they were the women who were subjected to forced militarized sexual slavery during World War II. And these were Korean women who were sent away from Korea all around Asia to service the Japanese soldiers. And I went to several of their demonstrations, and they would speak out openly about their experiences and what they went through. The process, how many years it took for the first woman, I think in the 90s, to finally speak out and share her story and go public with that, and all the taboos that unearthed, all the discrimination that she and many others faced afterwards. But there was this real solidarity among this network of really powerful women. And I just had this moment of God, my life is so much easier in comparison to what they've been through, and they're rocking it. They're vocal, they're out there, they're in their 80s, at the time I think 80s and early 90s. This is a movement that's dying out, right? But they have no fear. So I think those stories I found really inspirational from my own perspective, and just said, okay, there's no point. There's no point of being in the closet. There's no point of not being comfortable with who I am. There's no point in giving in to people who are pushing against you for coming out. So I think that was a big part of my, awakening, just being inspired by some of those stories.
And what got you to actually write this book? When did you decide to actually start writing Deficient?
So I've actually written many other books before Deficient, which have not seen the light, probably for good reason. But I think everything that I've worked on, I took my first creative writing course in college, and I really, really liked it. But I was definitely struggling with it because it didn't really come naturally. So it was a skill, I think a muscle that I had to work on over time. So anything that I wrote, I was really passionate about writing, but I think that exposed kind of the weaknesses and the areas in my writing that I needed to work on and improve. So by the time I got to Deficient, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna stop thinking about series. I'm gonna write a book that's standalone. It's not gonna be way past the word limits, because that was something else I was doing. I was writing way too much. And just make it a bit more manageable. And it is a story that can actually keep being told, but the Deficient itself is something that you can read start to finish. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I tried to draw from as many of the lessons that I learned over the years from my writing experience and the feedback that I've been getting. So I started it in 2011, I think finished the first draft in 2012, but then the drafting and editing process was something that went on for several years, actually. Yeah.
I'm going to invite you again to read another extract from the book.
So, in the world of Deficient, and hopefully you have it marked here, when you turn 8, that's kind of like the last, it's almost like learning a language. You learn languages better when you're younger, and then you hit a certain age and it's difficult to learn languages. So it's the same with accelerated ability status. If your ability hasn't manifested by the age of 8, you don't have one, and you're classified as deficiently accelerated. And there's a process behind that in terms of what happens, like going to specialists and seeing doctors and getting tested and really desperately trying to find out if you have anything. So Alejandro talks a little bit about this when he's reflecting on his past of what that was like. So I'll read a bit of that to everyone here now. But as my 8th birthday neared, I still hadn't received my ability. My parents were visibly nervous. As soon as I turned 8, they brought me to an accelerated ability specialist who put me through a series of tests. For the first test, the specialist had me squeeze 2 metal bars together as hard as possible. They barely budged. Lights in the bars turned on as I applied pressure, and numbers flashed on the specialist's hollow screen. This was obviously the test for ability S, enhanced strength. It was also obvious that I failed with flying colors. The ability R, or rapid movement test, proved that 1, I wasn't racer material, and 2, I was slower than the average boy my age, a double hit to my rapidly waning self-esteem. For the ability TP test, the specialist focused on a set of cards, and I had to telepathically guess the numbers he was thinking. I was unsuccessful. The next test was a meditation exercise where I had to visualize oneness, clarity, and nothingness, and I was supposed to turn invisible. Scratch ability I. Trying to telekinetically move even the smallest of objects proved impossible during the ability TK test, while jumping on a trampoline for the ability L test for levitation and flight. My stubborn, earthbound body refused to defy the law of gravity. So then he goes on to describe the ability F test, which is Farrell or Yolamba's classification, which is like a wild card classification. So anything that doesn't fit within the standard abilities would be technically called freely accelerated. So he fails all those as well. So after about 30 minutes, the specialist came into the waiting area. He called in my parents. He said he wanted to talk with them in private. Why is he doing that, I wondered. The only reason he would talk to them without me is if he had bad news. 10 minutes went by, and my parents were still talking with the specialist. My insides twisted with anticipation. Half of me wanted to know if I had an ability, but the other half could already sense something was wrong. My head felt hot, and my mind spun. The door opened. My dad was the first to enter the waiting area. He didn't bother looking at me as he stomped toward the exit. Instead of waiting for the automatic sliding door to open, he punched it, shattering it to bits. I was stunned. I'd never seen him do anything like that before. My mom came out next. Her eyes were watery and her tan face reddened. She took one look at me and broke into sobs. She lowered herself to her knees and gave me a hug. "No one is ever going to hurt my son," she said, weeping. I looked up to see the specialist closing his door. Apparently, his work was done. "Does this mean I don't have an ability, Mom?" I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. Mom pulled back and stared at me with her green eyes. They weren't like my dad's or brother's coffee-colored eyes, or even my aqua blue ones. She nodded. That's what the specialist said. I couldn't swallow. My face was burning. Teardrops slid down my cheeks. So what does that make me? Mom paused for a few seconds to collect her thoughts, and then she smiled. I guess it makes you Ale.
It's a beautiful place to start from.
Thank you.
I must say there's something I really appreciated in your writing is I found there's safety in how you write, Michael. Mm-hmm. You know, for someone who's struggling, the way you're swearing and you're not swearing. Mm-hmm. You know, the example. I mean, there were so many instances in this book that I was like, is it all right to say this? You know, if the teenager's going to read this. But I appreciated the fact that you yourself bring a sense of safety and sensitivity into the book, but also pointing people towards reality in it. And for me, it was a small thing, like there's a part that I think where Gwen, one of the characters in the book, is described as a streetwalker. Mm-hmm. You know, and I thought, oh wow, you know, but it's prostitution. you know, but you're not using prostitution. I just thought the use of the word streetwalker was like, oh, someone would question, what is a streetwalker? Without saying, you know, without being too technical about it, using, you know, a sex worker or something. But I just thought there's a way that you introduce words and realities into the book with a lot of sensitivity. So thank you for that. But yet again, there's something I like the way that, as much as this is geared towards a younger audience, you know, there were things that obviously there were sections of it that I thought, oh wow, this is my journey. This would apply to anyone else, and I'm just going to read one of those bits and pieces. I know I'm not supposed to look down, but I've never seen the hills and fields at this angle before. I'm seeing all kinds of things in a complete new way. The narrow highways look like blue lines full of tiny moving specks instead of vehicles. The farms are shaped into perfect quadrilaterals. I sense the dense wood in the dark, towering from the abandoned chapel. I can see the academy. It looks so small, nestled next to the massive Achewan Lake. I love how minuscule it is from here, and a mere blip on the landscape, but this is the part I really enjoy. Now that I've risen above a fear I didn't know, I had the sensation of flying through the sky without limits, transform into a total rush. This is what it feels like to soar like an angel. I spread my arms out, pretending they're wings, and laugh, and laugh. I can't stop. Tears slide from the corners of my eyes, from my temples. This is the sensation of undulated freedom. I just thought that could apply to anyone, maybe because I've also wanted to fly as well. You know, I never had to, but this was going back to my question in your writing voice. Were there surprises in the books, in the book to yourself as well as you edited and read it, like, oh wow, this is me, this is Michael, I've grown.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for selecting that passage and reading. And maybe just people are probably like, wait, I didn't think he had a superpower. So Gwen, the character you were speaking with, is a legion. She's the most powerful student in the school, and she has 4 abilities. So she has super strength, speed, she can fly, and then she can move objects with her mind. So she's sort of this, you know, very well respected, but she's almost a lone wolf because she's almost too special. And Ale ends up teaming up with this lone wolf. And what she does is she's so strong that she actually carries both Kazuki and Alejandro at different points in time, and she flies with them through the sky. So in that scene, he's actually doing that for the first time, and he's so afraid to open his eyes. And then I think Kazuki's like, oh, just open your eyes. And he does, and then he starts to see the world from a different perspective. So I think, yeah, there's some really beautiful moments where Ale is just observing the world, and he's feeling himself, and he's experiencing things from his perspective. And I think he really has a beautiful perspective to offer when he can see the beauty in things in ways that maybe other people can't. And I think maybe other surprises in the writing was just some of the characters. Like, some characters really just emerged out of nowhere, like Kazuki. So Kazuki's this bit of a comic relief character in the story. He also has 2 abilities, so he can turn invisible and he can read minds. And he ends up being a real help and support to Alejandro, even though he frustrates Alejandro to no end. But it was just amazing in the writing process how you could plan for things and try to outline as much as you want to outline, but then a character could actually just be born out of nothing, and they're there for a reason. And I think a lot of people who read the book say Kazuki was totally my favorite character, right? And I love hearing that because I don't know why. You liked him a lot too. I liked him a lot. So I think those things. I think there are some backstories to the characters that are quite interesting. So I think Gwen as well. Like, why is this superpowered person, Gwen, partnering up with Ale? What does she see in him? And I think as you read the book, you learn a little bit more about her backstory and why she sympathizes with someone like Alejandro, right? And she really has a soft spot for him. So I think that was also, it's not just Alejandro's story, but I think we can see, and I think what I got to see from the book is that even if you have an ability, even if you have a superpower, we're all struggling in our own ways. Even Gwen, who has those 4 abilities, right? So I think it's maybe a story that we can all relate to because life is hard. We're all dealing and grappling with it in our own ways, with the abilities that we have on offer, right? So I think when I go back and see or listen to the book, there's an audio version as well that's really well read by Benjamin Koenig, and just getting into the heads of some of the other characters is also quite fun to do, I think.
Are there plans of having this book in Spanish, considering it was birthed in Honduras?
I'm hoping, because a lot of my Spanish-speaking friends in the US and in Central America, Latin America have been asking. So I think if a book gets more popular and there's demand for it, of course that makes it easier for a publisher to translate it into other languages. The publisher is also looking into it as well, which is great. It does take a bit of time to find the right person who will do the translation, capture the voice accurately, but I really would love to see it in Spanish and hopefully other languages too. Yeah.
You're writing for a much younger audience. Is there a particular craft to that? I usually write for adults.
Yeah.
You know, and usually, and this was different for me. It was not what I would usually read, but I enjoyed it. Is there a different craft, a different voice that is needed when you're writing to teenagers?
Yeah, I think with a young audience, especially today, like we're so obsessed with social media, with bite-sized bits of information, capturing and keeping our attention is really difficult, whether you're an adult or a young person, I think. So I wanted to create something where the pace was quick enough, where the characters were compelling and people actually didn't really want to put the book down, right? I hope I was successful in doing that, but what I did was try to read books that did that for me, right? So the Harry Potter series, that was a series that I would read and I would just devour the whole thing. I would never put it down. I'd be reading, to 3 a.m., 4 a.m. sometimes, just to get through the books. The Hunger Games is another one, especially I think the first book really did it for me in terms of just this pacing. Once the games start, you just want to keep going. So I think I tried to do that with the book. There's a scene in the beginning that's it's actually a dodgeball scene. Like dodgeball is the sport of all sports in this futuristic world. And it's really cool because I get to do a dodgeball match with everyone having supernatural abilities except for Ale. So Ale's the one in the back who's like, what I would do in gym, I'd be in the back kind of just shuffling to the side, hoping not to get hit by the ball. But it was kind of a fun way to be able to capture the world through sports and through the lens of that experience. And keeping the pace going throughout the story as it turns into a murder mystery, essentially. Yeah.
Well, that's it for me. I don't know whether there are any questions from the audience. Please feel free to raise your hand. And I'm sure Michael will be more than willing to answer it.
Yeah.
What made you decide to write a young adult novel in the first place?
I think maybe it has to deal with an earlier question around like the books that I read growing up and what I was missing growing up. Like I would have loved to have read, and even though this book takes place in the future and it's not necessarily overtly about queer characters, the language has also evolved. So sexual orientation and gender identity, it's very fluid in this futuristic world, right? But I was hoping to read books as a young adult that maybe provided those different perspectives. So I was hoping to contribute maybe to the tapestry and the constellation of books that have been written since, but I felt growing up I just wasn't exposed to those perspectives. So I was hoping to offer something to young adults that felt different and read different. And maybe it did feel different when I first wrote it in 2011, right? In 2011, 2012. It just took a really long time to get it published, right? But that, in a sense, also allowed me to play with certain themes in different ways over time. And I think, it does add something, but it's also great that there are many, many other writers now who are offering really unique, diverse perspectives that speak to queerness as well.
Stephen.
So, a bit of a philosophical question, I apologize. Sort of a pen is mightier than the sword question in a way. If you look back in history, change seems to come through struggle. Are we at a moment where change is coming more through art? It seems to me we maybe are. Why is that? Is that a good thing?
Wow.
That's a good question.
Well, I see all of the incredible posters around the room with Gaza and Palestine, right? So we're and seeing the news today also with people who have been killed in Ukraine. We're still dealing with struggle at mass scale, right? And I don't know if we as humans are learning from struggle. I listened to a podcast recently reflecting, I'm actually listening to the book Doppelganger by, someone help me with the author's name? Naomi Klein, who wrote The Shock Doctrine. And she's reflecting on just the mirror worlds that we're living in at the moment, right? So we have reality, but we also have social media, the presences that we're crafting for ourselves, the brands, the companies, and then also the very kind of alternative fact thinking that's influencing our politics globally. So we're living in a really strange time, right? And one of the things that Naomi Klein says is that, you know, I used to think that my words were powerful, that I could actually change the world with a book, that my words would mean something. But you know, she's asking, have any of my books actually contributed to that change? Have they influenced the climate crisis? Have they influenced the shocks that are happening around the world? Are humans changing, or are we just getting worse? Who are the leaders that we are electing? Are they promoting actual change, or are they promoting a status quo, or are they pushing this sort of mirror world existence that's actually not based on reality, right? But it's this fictional world that we're putting forward. She uses the vaccines and the COVID crisis as well as one instance of people's warped interpretations of the science of the vaccinations and justifying those from really strange, radical perspectives. So yeah, I think art is more important now than ever, but I think it can easily get drowned out in the culture that we have nowadays of you go onto your phone, we're scrolling, there's a plethora of information, we scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, everything gets drowned out, it's hard to actually, you know, express yourself in that sense and in that scene. And the people who capture the most intention are the people who are, I guess, the most operatic or the most extreme, and are often promoting those extremes of the mirror world, right? Because the mirror is showing two sides, and it's not to say that one side is correct and one side is not. Anything at extremes, I think we have to be mindful of. So I'll keep creating art, I'll keep creating and writing as much as I can, and I would encourage everyone to keep doing it. But I think creating and offering up something to the world in 2024 is very different to how it would have felt having done it in 2011 or 2000 or 1990 or 1980, right? It's just a really complex world, and I think we're all part of it, and we're grappling with that reality, I think, every single day, yeah? I don't know if that answered the question. I'm not a great philosopher, but...
I don't think there is an answer.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, please. The one, and then the gentleman behind.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask you about your plans for continuing to create art. So you said that this book stands alone. I mean, you can read it, it has beginning, middle, and end. But then I also heard you talk about a sequel. So I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about your plans for your future writing.
Yeah, so thanks. So, yeah, great question. So it is a standalone novel, so it could just be fine and put it on the shelf and it tells its own story. But I think the beauty with anything related to, I guess, young adult stories or taking place in school, taking place in a really complex society is that the story can keep going. And it's great to see people who have reviewed the book. A lot of people are asking, we want to see the next one, we want to see the next one, we want to see the next one. So I love that. So I actually started writing the two sequels. I see it as 4 books. And I started writing 2 of them a long time ago. Because again, I started this in 2011. I kept writing and writing and writing. So I had drafted a 2nd book and a 3rd book. And when I went back to the US to start promoting the book in September, I took time off of work because I needed brain space, and I used the extra time that I had to revisit the old book, the 2nd book, and it needed a lot of work. So I think that's the other thing. As you know, being older now, having written a lot more, having, I guess, a bit more experience, I can go back to my older pieces and go, ooh, God, that needs a lot of work. So I call it plastic surgery. So I performed plastic surgery on my book. It took about 4 months until my brain was just spinning, and then I actually sent it over to an editor that I work with, and she's hopefully getting me her feedback back tomorrow, and then I'll get those wheels churning. But the 2nd book, the 1st book really takes place in the confines of the school and kind of Ale's home, and it's a bit more insular. And then the 2nd book, you'd actually see a bit more beyond the school. They're in prefectures, so you get to understand the prefectural system a bit more and how the society works. The ins and outs and the complexities of that. There's a thing called an assignation ceremony. So Alejandro's in a 4-year schooling system. So he's in the 1st semester of his 3rd year, and in the 2nd semester you go to the ceremony, and the prefecture tells you, okay, you're going to be doing this. So he'll find out what this is in the 2nd book, and that's going to flip his world upside down. So I think I don't want to give too much away, but it does keep going. And it's quite exciting. The stakes really rev up not only for Alejandro, but all of his friends.
We'll take the question from the gentleman behind.
All right. My question is around the evolution of the story, and I think Kelvin touched on it in relation to from 2011 to where we are right now. How do you feel that the story has changed from way when you are from New Jersey to all these different locations that you've been, because I feel there's a common story for queer people, but depending on where you come from, it's a bit different. Do you feel there's a touch that experiencing Honduras, Sierra Leone, Kenya has kind of tweaked the story from how it was before?
Totally, yeah, and I think just my writing in general. So I recently wrote a blog. I have a website. I recently wrote a blog on diversity in Deficient, because there's one character, Landon, who I in my brain imagined as a black male, but in my writing, I was really conscious of traps that I wanted to avoid, right? So I had read many books growing up where if they were written by a white author, the white author would describe the brown or black skin of certain characters, but then they wouldn't go into any descriptions around the white characters. So it was almost assumed that white skin was just the status quo, it was the norm, and therefore it did not need to be described. So I wanted to make sure in this book, in a futuristic world where perhaps issues around race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, those labels don't mean as much. I was trying to say, okay, how will these characters actually see each other? When they see each other, will skin color be the first thing they see? Probably not. They're going to be looking at personality. They're going to be looking at ability first and foremost, and then maybe it'll be more personality based or other features that are not necessarily skin color. And I wanted to make sure that the way I addressed that was equal across characters. So if I do mention skin at some point in time, that I'm doing that for the white characters as well as the non-white characters. So it was kind of that was an interesting thing to explore. Over the course of time as well, like pronouns evolved, right? So in 2011, pronouns were not on my radar. And in many of the countries I lived, they're not on the radar, right? So that's kind of a very Western introduction. And I know people struggle with pronouns and some people are happy to use them. Some people struggle with using them. Some people don't want to use them. But I found myself saying, oh God, like, do I have to, what would this look like in the future? And should I be looking into the pronouns that I'm using? And it's something I'm thinking about also in the second book that I'm writing. And even things around, there's one character, Gwen, who some people, for me, I fashioned Gwen off of this really powerful gymnast friend of mine in high school who just was superhuman. And then I have some readers who actually read and they say, oh, is Gwen trans? And I say, I don't know, I didn't make that decision, but I don't want to decide it for the reader either, right? The character of Landon, people have been saying to me when they'll see the trading card, they'll go, oh, I didn't realize Landon was black. I thought he was white and blonde haired. And I think you actually made the same observation. So I went back in my blog and said, okay, how did I describe Landon? Because obviously I didn't do a good enough job. But I talk about things like his eye color, I talk about his strength, I talk about his personality, I talk about how he wears his hair in twists. Though I don't actually say, this is a black person. But in my brain, that's who he was. So yeah, I don't know if you wanted
But
to...
it's interesting that you focus on hair, on braids,
Yeah.
and how people carry their hair, on their eyes and everything. There's a lot more of that in the characters than color. But I think for me, like in thinking Landon was white, was just maybe having watched a lot of high school dramas and films that the bully is blonde and blue-eyed. That I figured Landon was also that.
Yeah.
But in how you describe, you focus on the things and the fluidity, like Yolamba's eyes change and everything, and her hair color and from braids and everything, and even the fact that she had braids for me didn't match. Later on I realized, oh, Yolamba is black, because anyone can wear braids. There was that, and I was setting myself in that place where there was a lot of fluidity in everything, within the characters, within how they lived.
Yeah.
As well. Interesting observation. In the future, is everyone vegan? Because there's a lot of, if you look at the book, there's no meat in this book.
There are nutrition cubes. So I was very inspired. There's actually a lot of Korean food in the book, and I think anyone who knows me here knows that I love Korean food. But I did want to
manage to get Korea in well in this. I didn't know all that.
They're eating kimbap and but it's a diverse cuisine, so the cuisine is influenced by different places. But it is a more sustainable future, I think. So it wouldn't be heavily meat-based. Now they're not meant to be subliminal vegan messages. Like, don't worry, I'm not trying to send those. But I was trying to think of what will be a more sustainable way of our food intake. And I think I tried to have it influenced by the different places where I have lived and the food that I've really liked. yeah, but interesting observation. And so people really say, like, there are a few scenes where the characters are munching on stuff, and it's very, like, I did spend a bit of time, like, describing the food, how it tastes, and people are like, oh, I like those food scenes, you're making me hungry. So yeah, but if there are any other cuisines, I could put, you know,
maybe because I was reading it in Kenya, I'm like, where's the meat, man? There's no nyama in this book, you know.
Ugali and chapati will have a better chance.
Amen to that. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I want to talk about the publishing journey. You said it was really, how was that like for you? You said it took a while, there's a lot of knocking on doors. And maybe for people who are actually getting books published, what did you learn from that process?
Yeah, it was a really long process. So I wrote, and I think what I've done oftentimes is when I've shared my books out with publishers, or the first step is trying to find an agent who will represent your book, right? And that takes a very long time. Well, it depends. You know, you might have a great book and a great idea, and you'll get an agent quite quickly. But a lot of people really struggle with it, and even the J.K. Rowlings of the world have gone through, I think, over 100 letters, and finally one lands, and you get your agent. So often, I think what I did in the past, looking at my writing career, like, I think I would often send things out to agents before maybe they were ready to go, right? So I would always recommend, if possible, you know, having a professional editor go through your work, at least giving it one round of professional editing even before you get it out to an agent, not waiting for the agent to do that or waiting for your eventual publisher to do that. So if at least you can present the cleanest manuscript possible to who is looking at it. I did get an agent at one stage, which was great. I was all excited. I thought, you know, this is going to be the big change. This is going to be fantastic. And I worked with that agent for a year, and then another year, and then another year. And she was actually really, really good. And she helped me, I think, strengthen the manuscript. But then we started pitching it to different publishers, and then I think eventually the agent left the agency. And then the agency didn't really take it forward, so I ended up having to part ways. So it was a bit of a challenging journey, and then I was just exhausted by the end of that. By that point, I was living in Sierra Leone. My headspace was elsewhere. I gave up on the book for a while, and it wasn't really until I came to Kenya in 2021 that I said, you know, I really liked the idea of this book. I'm going to give it another chance. I'm going to read it again. I picked up books on, like, the craft and the art of writing and storytelling, and one of the key pieces that I needed to address to make this manuscript better was that piece that I spoke of before. How to give Alejandro, who's a character that has very little self-confidence, agency in the book, so that you want to root for him the way that we root for Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. So I think maybe the draft that I had in hand wasn't quite doing that, or it could have done it in a better way, and that was really an existential piece. It wasn't an easy, you know, fix the period here, fix the comma here. So it's like, oh God, how do I do this? So that was, again, plastic surgery. And I think once I cracked that, then I started getting more interest and feedback in the book. I decided to approach publishers that you could approach directly rather than going through an agent. I just wanted to bypass the agent process. And I came across a few different publishers. And one publisher I was looking at, they were interested, and then they read the manuscript again, and they said, oh, you know, there's a character that loses their life in a certain way. And they said that for any of the books that they publish, they don't want that sort of darkness in the book. So the publisher that I went with was like, we don't care, you know, like we publish dark literature, so the dark, you know, we're happy to welcome that. It's not a turnoff for us. So it's been a really great publisher to work with. It's a small publisher based in the US, but the book is distributed globally on Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes & Noble. So you can find it in a lot of places. But I think it's been an interesting learning journey also working with this publisher around just how publishing works. So there's top 5 publishers that you can work with. So I think that's a writer's dream if you can publish with those top 5 big ones. It just gives you more market and more reach, and that might be something to think about in the future. But for now, I'm happy with the way it's gone, and BHC Press has been a fantastic publisher to work with.
What are the other plans of getting the book into what other audiences here in Kenya? I know Cheche is one space. Are you? There are a lot of young people who would take this book up.
Yeah.
You're exploring, looking at this to a much more Kenyan audience, because they do lead. If you go to Textbook Center, there's a lot of sci-fi there as well, fantasy stuff. Is that something, and where, you know, we could also let people know?
Yeah, so Textbook Center, I met with them recently. They've requested information, so I've sent them all over last week all the information about the book. So we might see it in Textbook Center soon. Who knows? I think other bookstores in Kenya, and I know Kevin has also recommended quite a few. Cheche is incredible because Cheche is the first one that really stood up and said, hey, we'll take this book and we'll do this event. We're so excited about it. So I'm happy that it's starting here. And Uba has been, Uba and the whole team have been absolutely fantastic. I've also, in the past 4 months when I was, September to December, I was in the US, but I was also traveling. And I shared Deficient with different schools in the United States, in New Jersey. I went to Nepal for 2 weeks actually, so the Lincoln School there was interested, so they brought me over and I did 3 days in Kathmandu and 3 full days of assemblies, of classes, sessions with creative writing students. I passed out the trading cards with elementary, middle, high school, and I'm hoping to do something similar with ISK in Kenya, but if there are any other schools that people know of in Kenya where you'd like to have a visiting writer, I'm more than happy. It doesn't have to be these kind of fancy schmancy international schools, right? And yeah, I'm more than happy to engage with the younger audience. I think my main audience that I know I know mostly adults, right? So I'm always really excited when I can share the book with young people and get their perspectives on what they got from it.
And what were they telling you in Nepal? If they'd managed to read it, or just your interaction with them?
So since it was new to Nepal, I don't think any of the students had read it, but they loved the characters. So one of the exercises that I do with them is I share the character trading cards. They look at the stats and they get all excited. And then I do a creative exercise, depending on the age, where I help them create their own characters and their backstories. And so I was basically doing a bit of kind of theoretical work with them around how do you create multi-dimensional characters that feel real, that are not, don't feel like cartoons, essentially. So a few tips and tricks from a writing perspective of how to create multi-dimensional characters, and then actually working with them to design some characters of their own, and with older crowds, actually working with them on their own writing and reviewing the writing and giving a bit of feedback from my perspective. And then just delving into storytelling in general, like whether or not you read or you write, we all watch stories and absorb stories. So what makes us connect to a character like Katniss? What makes us connect to a character like Moana? And understanding sort of the journey behind that character and what makes us root for those characters as protagonists. So yeah, I kind of do a few things where I talk about my book, and I can also use Alejandro as a lens for that as well. But I also like to connect with people with stories that they're familiar with and that they've read.
Michael, congratulations. Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you about Deficient. Tell us a little bit more about where we can find out about your work.
Yeah, so I have a website, michaelsolisauthor.com, so you can go there. I'm also on Instagram at michaelsolisauthor. I'm on a few other social media platforms, TikTok, kind of on Twitter. I don't use it that much. X, I guess that's what it's called now. So I try to be as active as possible, but I also try to kind of sometimes avoid social media so I can focus on other things. And I have a blog. And I have a newsletter. So I think a few people have signed, if you want to join my newsletter. Don't worry, I don't send, every 2 months, maybe I'll send a message over email. So I won't be flooding your inboxes. But there are definite ways to get in touch. There's a contact button on my website as well if anyone wants to ever get in touch. And then also tonight, I'm happy to sign books, happy to share more information, happy to pass out some trading cards. You should all be getting free trading cards and bookmarks, and the bookmarks have more information on there as well. So yeah, you have a few ways of getting in touch with me if you'd like.
So, Asante Sana, Michael. The book signing will take place behind here, and a big hand for Michael and Deficient. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. Have a happy weekend. Please saunter around Cheche. There are fantastic books around here. And please do visit this and other Kenyan bookstores around. There's a lot of good Kenyan African literature in Nairobi, in Kenya. Encourage the literacy. Like Stephen said, this is how we're going to encourage change, I think, through arts and culture. Have a lovely weekend.
And one thing before we wrap up, a big thank you to Kevin. A round of applause. I've heard your book posting, and you're excellent. Maybe Stephen, if you have Kevin's book. Kevin, if you can plug your own book that you've been working on, can you talk about it a little bit before we wrap up?
Yeah, Stephen's holding the book.
The only copy.
But the book is also available here at Cheche, and there's another book that we have, which I hope you don't mind me doing this.
Yeah.
Which we launched in December. It is another collection of LGBTQ stories from Kenyans who are 60 years and above. So yeah. Like I said, Cheche is a treasure trove of stuff. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening. Asante.
Thank you.